Hello everybody and welcome back to KXP, where we aim to explore the furthest reaches of the cosmos. And today we are going to take the next step in doing that, and unfortunately we have to do a mission that we've done plenty of times before on this channel. However, it is important and it will lead us into the future, and that is a landing on Minmus. In the last episode, we did a flyby of Minmus and was able to get quite a bit of science from that. Today we're going to do another tourist contract as we go by Minmus. We're going to take Bob Kerman. They just want to do a flyby, however, they will be getting a little extra for their money and take them on a full orbit. So here we are, we've got plenty of money, plenty of science. Let's go ahead and jump into the research and development building and spend what we can to help our mission. And after a long amount of looking, I decided on Specialty Rocketry Tier 7 for the Poodle engine. And we're going to get these advanced actuators. We don't need them mostly, but in a coming episode, I'm going to want one of those pieces. So it's good to just unlock it now. Especially since everything else is kind of negligible. I don't need the technology to get there, so. And we still have Research a Celestial Body, that is our observatory. And the Minmus program, which apparently all we need to do is plant a flag. So that's going to be interesting. So that means that we're going to forego the probe landing, because, you know, even though we're doing an unkerbal start and we should kind of focus on probes before crewed, however, we're not taking the probe before crewed, so I don't feel as obligated to stick to that as possible. We are going to take a small landing cam. This is going to be an Apollo-style mission, and what I mean by that is where we have a separate lander that will detach, land on the surface, while the main service module will be orbiting above. And when it's time to return home, the landing module will rendezvous with the service module, transfer all the science and kerbals, and then it'll be left in orbit while the rest of the kerbals take the service module back home. And it's one of the ways to kind of save on weight and fuel, instead of taking the craft from orbit to Minmus and then down landing on Minmus and then back into orbit, then back to Kerbin. All that fuel that will be required, taking it back and forth, it's extra weight, so we are going to do this a little bit more simply. Or I guess that would be more complicated, because it'd be just obviously more simple to just throw on more boosters. But anyways, here I am in my service bay. I'm going to be putting my experiments in three-way symmetry. I don't, however, need 3 seismographers, because we can only do those while landed. I will fix that later, but for the time being, let's just set up our action groups, all of our different science. I'm going to throw some onboard cameras in here. In case you were unaware, there is a science experiment in the control tab, so where you normally do RCS and reaction wheels and stuff, there's this onboard camera that you can collect for science. And there we go, we just removed the seismographers, the extra ones. We put a science collection bay on top, so that will automatically, well, not automatically, but we'll set it up to an action group to pull all the data from all the different experiments and store it together, because we're going to have to be doing quite a bit of EVA maneuvering of our scientists to collect and restore all the data. So let's just make it as easy for them as possible. They will still have to restore the Science Junior and the Mystery Goo, so there will be some climbing out on the ladders to do science. There we go, we've got Mystery Goo and then a couple experiments from D-Magic's orbital science. Got our magnetometer boom there. And this experiment return unit, I think, is designed to have like a heat shield and a parachute on it. And the goal is to actually just send that back to Kerbin, like if you're doing a probe or something. But yeah, anyways, initially I wanted to make it very much like the Apollo style lander with the tanks all tucked in and everything, but because of the material bay, it ended up being a lot taller than I liked, so instead of that design, we're just going to kind of tack a fuel tank on underneath like that. And once again, just adjusting all of the action groups, making sure they're all set up correctly. Action groups are very important, more important in the KSP POV series, but nonetheless, action groups are quite useful. So now we're going to put a little bit of monoprop in there, monopropellant, and that will help our RCS maneuver, and we're gonna need some RCS on this because of the rendezvous and the docking. It'll just be so much easier to have RCS control. And so now we are going to grab some low profile thruster blocks, and we're going to put them in 4-way symmetry here, diagonal, so that way they don't block the escape hatch. Also going to put one of these tracking lights, that's from the tracking light mods, on there, and I enjoy it because it allows my Kerbal to wander around on the surface but still be able to have light even if it's in the dark. Okay, now it's time to auto strut. It's a very important thing when dealing with Apollo style landers because you're connecting the rocket to the not decoupler, the docking port. And so it makes things a little wobbly on launch, and so it's very important to have your entire craft auto strutted, or at the very least have legitimate struts on there. I realized there was some surface science that I can add on here, once again from DMagic's Orbital Science. There's 3 experiments where you can actually test the ground with it. However, this one that I just added right there will be useless, and I'll have to remove it later. Alright, so now time to set up our action groups. Number 1 is deploy. Number 2 will open our service bay. 3, 4, and 5 are the science. So we're going to do high in space, low in space, and then landed. AG6 is going to be the collection of all that science, and AG7 will be the ladder, or not AG7, excuse me, the action group that opens the service bay will activate the ladder. I think about throwing Kerbal Engineer System on there, but for some reason I didn't. It doesn't really end up, being a problem that I don't have Kerbal Engineer on there. However, it would have been smart to just include, but couldn't tell you why I decided not to. Can't remember. This has actually been, I recorded this footage about a week ago, maybe a little over that. I've just been making some serious progress on this, and I wanted to kind of have a full complete program ready to go, and let me tell you, we do quite a bit on Minmus in the next coming episodes. But now it's time for our first test. Wow, I can't explain just how well that test went. I mean, obviously we need to add a few more things like solar panels, but yeah, this lander is basically good to go. I do need to remove one of the science experiments. As I mentioned before, it only works on planets with an atmosphere, but we'll be doing that in a second. Just looking for any kind of experiments, any other last minute things that we can tack on there, but alas, there's nothing. This lander is basically perfect, so let's go ahead and start working on the service module, and that is the part of the craft that will get us to Minmus as well as bring us home. It doesn't need to be much. The Poodle engine that I just unlocked at the beginning of this episode is going to be powerful enough to push everything and bring us to where we need to go. And so now what we're doing is we're just kind of building it from the base up. We're also going to put a science experiment holder on here. We're going to put that to action group 7. So that way once we rendezvous with the lander and transfer our Kerbal over, we can just use an action group to suck all the science from the lander into the service module so we can bring it home. So now I need to add some RCS into there, and that is quite a bit of RCS, so I don't think I need that much. I'm playing around with the engine design, kind of seeing which way we like more. I kind of like this singular engine design, the look of it. It's very nice. Let's put a reaction wheel in there so we have a lot more control, especially as we're coming in for a landing back on Kerbin. And we're just going to kind of stick these little side tanks on here to handle our monoprop storage. The service module really doesn't need to be all that fancy, because this is literally just the transfer stage and the return stage. It does need, however, to have a docking port on it. That was very important. I'm glad that I didn't forget and just leave that parachute there, because that would have been bad. So now it's time to wrap everything all up in a fairing and auto strut as well. Let's do that before we wrap everything up in the fairing, because that'll make things a lot more complicated. It's if you don't know about auto strut, go into your settings. Under your typical settings, there should be something called advanced tweakables. So if you don't see auto strut in your options, you're gonna need to turn that on. So I throw another tracking light on there. It's also very useful when docking. Keep an eye on your craft and how far it is, and just having some light. So if you're coming in and rendezvousing in the dark, which sometimes you kind of have to do, like you really just have to take whatever the best approach is and kind of go with that. So if you're rendezvousing in the dark. So unfortunately we had an issue with this shroud here. It kind of blocked it, so I decided to try a different style engine and a different shroud type to see what that can do, but fortunately I don't feel too confident in that engine shroud ability. So we're going to put this engine plate on here. That is from the Making History DLC. However, there is a mod that adds some of those parts, so if you don't have an engine plate and you don't have the Making History DLC, then just go ahead and check around for that mod. Alright, so we set it up a little differently. Hopefully it'll work. So the shroud works, but the amount of force that it kicked our craft back from the decouple was too much. So let's turn that down, try again. Alright, once again, too much force on the decoupler. So now, I also realized I needed to add a few more things to the action groups. And I need to switch around my staging because I kept doing that every test. And you should just do it here in the VAB, and then you never have to do it again. So that was a pretty excellent test of the service module. I didn't do the full mission there, but I do have enough Delta V to feel pretty confident that I can return. I am going to add a little extra fuel because, you know, it just makes me feel better, and it's not too much weight. I feel like we'll still be able to run the same exact mission with it. So now it is time to build the launch vehicle, and it's going to be a fairly simple one. We're getting very simplified in our launch vehicles now that we have better engines and more powerful SRBs. So I go ahead and throw an engine plate on here, once again from the Making History DLC, and I throw some of these, I forget the name of them, but they're essentially the Raptor engine. Put them in a 4-way symmetry, give them enough space so they're not bonking into each other. Turn down their gimbal because they have a pretty high gimbal range. They don't need that much control. There is a need for some thrust to weight ratio on takeoff, so we're going to go ahead and put these big ol' SRBs on there with some nose cones to keep them aerodynamic. And now we have above a 1.0 thrust to weight, and so I'm pretty happy. Hey, remember when I talked about auto strutting and said how important it was? Yeah, let's do that with the rest of the rocket. And it would actually help to strut the two crafts together, keep them from wobbling within the fairing. And hopefully this'll work out a lot better with real struts. So we still have a little bit of wobbliness, but that's not going to be as much of a problem. What I didn't like, however, what I want to change in this time is get a better launch vehicle. I didn't like the Raptor engines, so I'm going to go with this mainsail. We're going to do some mainsails on the side boosters, and we're going to use some fuel ducts to connect the fuel as well. So let's try this. I think I'll be a lot happier with this launch vehicle. And I cannot tell you how good that was, except it was good. We did the full mission from launch to almost landing. We brought back into the atmosphere. However, we accidentally staged when we meant to turn on our thruster. So we didn't actually do the landing of that test, but we did everything else. And I just feel like a little extra fuel in the side boosters will do us good, just to give a little bit of extra fuel upon leaving. And we need to get rid of Valentina, who snuck her way on board in the test flight. Leave the Mach 1 lander can empty and load it up with the Kerbal that wants to see Minmus. And that will be our last test. Let's get this out on the launch pad. Alright, so here we are, once again on the launch pad, getting ready to send our Kerbals to Minmus. We have a nice easy takeoff. Our thrust to weight is, I think, somewhere over 2.1, something like that. So this rocket has a lot of control. Gimbling has been turned down, so we're not pitching over farther than we can handle. And I know that until we pass this cloud layer, there's no numbers that I need to focus on. No speed warning I need to do. No smart ASS. I can just cruise on up. And we are going to skip forward through this mission a little bit, kind of to show the more important parts, the circularization. We didn't, you've seen this launch to orbit many times. Even in this series, we've done a launch to orbit several times, so there is no need to rehash that. Here we are making our inclination change. We had enough fuel in our lower lifting vehicle to handle that. We still have 200 some odd meters per second delta V, so we're going to use that as well. But now comes time to reconfigure our craft, turn our service module around, and dock it with the lander. And unfortunately I don't go far enough away, so I give it a little bit of a bonk as I turned around. I should have waited just a little bit more, gotten a little farther away, but we ended up giving it a little bonk in our test flight, so we know that we'll be able to handle this. It isn't ideal. It would have been so much easier to just flip around and be pointed directly where I needed to be. I can just kind of push myself forward. That was the plan. That was the ideal. However, we can think on our feet here, and we have RCS. We have plenty of RCS, and on the service vehicle is not as important as it is on the lander. So I feel pretty confident that even though we're using it to dock here, it will be fine later on. Bring up the docking port alignment indicator mod, and that helps out a lot because if you just try to go by looks itself, you're going to need to flip the camera around many different times to really line yourself up. But by having the mod up, you can kind of coordinate your visual lining up with a technical lining up. And once again, I was a lot closer than I thought, so I ended up bumping the solar panel, which readjusted the way that it was focused, and so now I had to come back. But I feel a lot more confident now. Nice and close, so now all we gotta do is come in softly enough that we don't push it away. With that, we get a little bit of a bump, a second bump, but our RCS is adjusting us, and we made connection. We have officially did the first step of an Apollo-style mission, and we are going to be ready to go. I do need to adjust my staging around a little bit to make sure I fire the correct engine when it's supposed to, but that all looks good. So now comes time to plot out our Minmus injection. And since I was at the periapsis at the correct location, I decided to just burn the rest of my lower stage fuel so we can just go ahead and separate and just really focus on using the Poodle engine from now on, because it's vacuum efficient, so it's meant to do that. We're going to skip ahead a little bit because it was a long burn, and get close to the sphere of influence change, and we're just going to manually kind of burn our way through, but we had too much thrust, so it's just going to be better to plot in our maneuver and let remote tech handle it. So let's turn down our thrust limiter on this, because the Poodle engine is quite powerful. It's got more kilonewtons of thrust than the Terrier engine, so, which is to be expected since it is about twice the size. So we're just going to kind of get ourselves through. We are going to do a little bit of science here in high space above Kerbin. We don't have crew report to do because we've already done that, but we are going to be able to pick up a little residual science from the mystery goo and from the materials bay. Just need to get Bob out to restore them. If anybody knows an easier way to rotate the Kerbin's body on the, what would that be, the Z-axis? To be able to rotate them forward, backwards, not in IVA mode. I can do it really easily in IVA mode, but I can't seem to change his direction in third person. So if you know how to do that, let me know. But we go ahead and we get him into the lander can, and we're going to try to fix the IVA on the service module, but I couldn't find the button for it, so we decided to just forgo it. We're not doing this in IVA mode, so it doesn't really matter. Here we are, coming in on the sphere of influence change, making connection with our ComNet satellite, which is nice. And here we are now in the sphere of influence. So since we're in high space, we're going to go ahead and do more science. We don't have a lot because we did science in high space over Minmus in the last episode for our flyover. So this is just collecting some of the residual science of some of the pieces that can't be collected in full in the first time, like the target scanning and the mystery goo and the material studies. So not a lot of science, but it is science that we did not have, and therefore that is the goal. So I did forget to press the action group to collect all the science, so we're going to go pop back in, press that button, and then we can go out and restore everything. And no EVA report to be had, so we are all good. So we did our science high in space above Minmus, and so now, because we missed low space in the last episode because we were in control of our communications satellite as opposed to our crewed vessel, so we missed in space low. So that'll be something that we can grab as we do our circularization burn, because I believe our periapsis is low enough that once we hit it, we will be in low space. I like the way that looked, and it's just a fun little design. I might use that as the thumbnail. We'll see. I mean, well, you'll see. I won't. You'll know before I do. But anyways, here we are coming on in. Our time warp stops us 3 minutes to the burn, which should have let me know that we were way too far away. And what that was once again, the throttle was limited. So I adjusted the throttle. We came on in, and we are now in orbit. We're parked above the surface of Minmus. There was really no point in including the circularization burn. It was just the long burn, nothing interesting. I want to focus the majority of this episode on actual Minmus itself, with the landing process and with the science done from the surface. So, I mean, this episode is already very long. It's even longer for the channel members because we did all that test flight, but this video is long enough, and as opposed to making it a part 2, a two-parter, which I probably could have done. I could probably crank out half-hour episodes if I turn these into two-parters. However, we are doing so much on Minmus in these next few episodes. Like, every single one of them could probably end up being a two-parter, and we'll be doing the same missions for weeks at that point. So I hope you don't mind a longer episode that we can get more done in. If you prefer shorter episodes, let me know that in the comments below. If the long format isn't conducive, or if you know. Anyways, we have 1,354 meters per second of delta V, which is way more than we need to land, way more than we need to circularize. So I'm looking forward to this. If all goes according to plan, we should be able to hit multiple biomes and really crank up the science that we get from this mission. I didn't do a multi-biome hop in the test flight footage, so that is going to be a challenge that we have not prepared ourselves for. But Bob Kerman is the intrepid scientist, and the pilots that are monitoring the probe core have him in the greatest of hands. So now I'm going to bring up these 3 bits of screen here that will give you an idea on our landing. I think I'm going to do this from now on because it's really, I have to pay attention to numbers a lot when I'm doing this, and so and the numbers are fairly small on screen as is. If I were to make the UI even bigger, it would take up even more screen. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to highlight these 3 things, and the important parts are the time to impact and the suicide burn countdown. If you're going to look at any of those numbers, the suicide burn countdown is the one that is most important to me. However, our altitude and our surface speed, currently it's set to orbital speed, but our surface speed is also very crucial in landing correctly. If I miss my suicide burn countdown by even 0.01 seconds, we will have an impact, and that is not good. And keeping an eye on our surface speed will let us know how likely that is to happen if we do end up missing. So, fingers crossed. And I started a little early just to make sure my engines were responsive. And at 0.3 seconds, I managed to activate our engines. So we managed on time, which means that we should not impact. And our surface speed drops almost to 0, and we end up flipping up. So I have no fear that we will land safely, as long as I don't jam on the throttle and go up too far, which can happen. I've done it. But there we go, safely landed on Minmus for the first time in this playthrough. And wouldn't you know it, back over there we can see Duna. I'll end up focusing on it a little bit later, a little bit closer, but yeah. So KXP, the Kerbal Exploration Program, has taken its first steps into space, into celestial body transit, and landing on another surface. So here we are, just collecting all of our science, and we are getting quite a bit from it. 60 here, 40 there, 50 here, 125. Like, this is going to give us so much science. We're going to be able to unlock so many new parts and things to do. I'm so excited. However, we are not quite done here yet, because I mentioned I want to go to different biomes, and I also want to set the groundworks for a Minmus base. I'm not sure if it's going to be a colony style base or mainly just a refueling center that will help us in extraplanetary launches. However, I do know that I want it on the flats to have the best surface, and I do want it relatively equatorial because I want it to be easy to approach. But first, let's, because we grabbed science from the Greater Flats because that's where we landed, but let's grab some lowlands science. So we're going to flip ourselves around. We got our trajectory showing us that we're going to land on a relatively flat-ish place. Have Bob go out of the craft to do a crew report because we did not do a crew report over the Greater Flats. Also do all the science that I can, collect it, get them back out to restore. I don't know why I have my Science Junior tab open. I guess I didn't notice it. Sometimes you end up cluttering up your screen with too much. But so now I'm over the lowlands, so I want to go ahead and do another crew report, because you can get different crew reports over each biome, so it's important to pay attention to that if you're trying to min-max the science and really just get the most. So once again, I bring the screens up. However, it's less of a danger here because I'm not going nearly as fast as I was when I deorbited. But nonetheless, we can still break ourselves. We landed fairly close to a green sandstone, so that's going to be great for us. We don't have any contracts to bring them home, and if we were to have switched back to the KSC, we may have had one. Like, we may currently have a contract to bring that home, but we're not going to bother with that. We're just going to grab it. Once again, I did my suicide burn at 0.3 seconds, which is very risky, but it is also most efficient. So, you get what you get. Doing more surface experiments, this time in the lowlands. 40 science, 25 science, 40 science, 40, 60, 50, 125, and 30. Pretty standard, it seems like. That's what we're going to be getting for each of this stuff. Let's go ahead and collect all that science. Excuse me, I just bumped the mic. Let's collect all that science, get him out on EVA, and restore the experiments. Do an EVA report and store it. And we forgot to do it at the Greater Flats, but Bob can go ahead and do an EVA report while landed, as well as take a surface sample. We should take surface samples everywhere we go, because those are also worth quite a bit of science. So he is the first Kerbal to put boots on the surface of Minmus. However, he doesn't even take any time to enjoy it, because he really wants to get his flag planted in the correct location, and that's not going to be here. But we did see that green sandstone when we came in, so we're definitely going to want to grab that before we go anywhere else, because we're not sure where those are going to be exactly, and they may not have any on the Greater Flats. I can't remember if they do. You see the light that followed us? That's the tracking light mod that I talked about. Not entirely useful when it's daytime, but let me tell you, when you have to do stuff at night on another planet or anywhere, really, having that is great. So now we're just carefully EVA thruster packing our way there. Gotta make sure you don't build up too much speed. You can crash and burn. Well, not burn, but crash and destroy. Spaghettify sometimes. So let's go ahead and take a surface sample of this area and an EVA report, and let's go ahead and take this sandstone back with us for study. And 150 science for that. We can't transmit it. We have to take it back, but it's very cool. We don't normally get these very often. Like even in our series, there's our ship. Even in all of our series, we haven't really done too much of the breaking ground science. That's another DLC, but we haven't done a lot of the breaking ground science, gotten the sandstones or that. We have a couple series where we place the surface science pieces. And I think we might do that again with this Minmus base. Yeah, look at that. You see the little light on the ground that's following me? Beautiful. Another perfect landing from Bob. I say another because in the test flight he flipped around and landed on his feet. So he's been impressing me with his acrobatics. And once again, ready to get back into his craft, launch another time. We still have plenty of Delta V, like I am not worried at all. But I decided I want it in that little cove area, that little bay of, if there was any water on here, it would have been a little cove. Anyways, that's where I want my Minmus base. So let's go ahead and just point ourselves in that direction. We're going to use our trajectories mod to kind of angle ourselves the way that we want to. I will make one more adjustment to that final trajectory before settling on it, because that's still a little bit farther out than I want. Once again, we got the 3 screens. You can see my suicide burn countdown, my surface speed, and my altitude. So yeah, as you see here, I'm going to point normal to go a little more left. And I want it kind of more centralized in that semicircle. So that'll do us nicely, right about there. So we canceled out a lot of our momentum, so we kind of hovered there for a second in our surface speed, but now we're picking it back up again. Our suicide burn countdown gives us about 30 seconds. We're only going to need a burn for about 1.5 seconds, 2 seconds, because we're not going all that fast. You can tell that by subtracting the time to impact, or the suicide burn countdown from the time to impact, and I'll tell you how much you need to burn for. But those numbers change, so it's not easy to do that math on the fly. I mean, it might be easy, just if you're not good at math like me, then it's not easy to do that math on the fly. But we burned at 0.4 seconds from our suicide burn countdown, which means, once again, we have safely touched down on Minmus. Now, I don't think I need to do any science here short of the surface report, So it is time to plant our flag. Bob is super excited to hear the go-ahead from Mission Control, reaches in his pack, pulls out a flagpole, and plants one in the name of Kerman. I did, however, forget to change my flag. I wanted this one to be the Minmus flag, and we will eventually come back here and replant a Minmus version of the flag. We are using the minimalist system flags for every Kerbal body is the name of it. A little bit of a mouthful, but that's the name of our flag pack, and it creates a flag for every celestial body in the Kerbal system. So you got a dedicated Duna flag, dedicated Eve flag, Gilly, Moho, Dre. I've always called it Dre, but I think people call it Dress. Regardless, we got flags for everything here. Alright, so he is now once again getting back in the cockpit. We're just kind of doing a little EVA view, or IVA view. This is the mod free IVA that allows you to walk about the cabin. But now we're just going to kind of line ourselves up. I wanted to get back into the daylight because it was almost nighttime when we got back into our craft. So we time warped until it was daytime, and our rendezvous craft, the service module, is almost overhead, but not quite. Now we're going to point ourselves eastward to try to line up with the service module's orbit. We do, of course, burn too far up. That was a problem that I noted in the test flight, and I told myself not to do that. I need to pay attention to my altitude, but I did not, and the Terror engine on Minmus is just so powerful, so efficient, that really it just takes a puff. But we've got quite a bit of Delta V left. I have no fear that we're going to be able to circularize, and if we run out of fuel at the circularization burn, like, as long as we make it to orbit, we'll be fine, because we have fuel in the service module, we have RCS on all that if this craft just runs out of fuel and can't move forward, obviously without the RCS, but if it's dead in the water, that'll be okay, because we can rendezvous with the other thing. What we can't have is have it not have enough Delta V to circularize. I don't know why it allowed me to do more science. I think that's because all of those experiments were already stored in the science collection bit, so I think it just kind of assumed that we hadn't run it because it wasn't collected in the capsule. Nonetheless, we went ahead and did it. Get Bob out on EVA once again to collect and restore. And now it's time to time warp to our maneuver. Go ahead and let remote tech handle it. And there we go. Let's go ahead and get rid of that. And so now we're going to need to adjust our inclination if we want to rendezvous with any kind of ease. I'm gonna add my maneuver here. I'm not really sure. I've rendezvous. I have the basis idea of rendezvous, but as far as like being pro at it, I can't claim that. Like, and that's because I don't know where the best place to place this maneuver. I just kind of chose near my apoapsis. I just kind of picked the place, and I'm just gonna maneuver my moves, or adjust my maneuver, move my maneuver until I get something that I want. But until I can kind of just like look at a place and be like, oh yeah, this is where I need to make my maneuver if I want to intercept over here. Have yet to perfect that skill. As you see here, I am adjusting my inclination, trying to get as close to 0 as possible, and I managed to snag a maneuver that will do that. Just need to turn down my thrust a little bit so I don't overburn. And once again, we're going to let Remote Tech handle it. And we're going to be kind of speeding forward again. Once again, we're going to kind of get rid of some of the dead air in our footage, the waiting for maneuvers, the pushing forward. We're just going to kind of cut to the important parts because, again, this episode is very long. Thank you so much for sticking around for this. I really appreciate the dedication that some of you have for watching through my episodes. And because yeah, I know they're long. But, you know, I try to have something successful by the end of each episode. So something, either success or failure, but regardless, I try to build towards something in each episode. So by sticking around to the end, you get to see what it was that I was building towards, and I appreciate that. So thank you very much. But anyways, back to our craft. Let's go ahead and time warp our way to our maneuver. And just 20 some odd delta V left. I'm going to bring up the rendezvous information from this point on, so you can kind of keep an eye on my time to my closest approach, the closest approach distance, the relative velocity at the approach, the distance to target, and the relative velocity. All of that information is very important to see when doing the rendezvous. Obviously, you can do it without it. Stock Kerbal has some tools that help you rendezvous, but the MechJeb rendezvous information window is unparalleled. Excuse me. No, it is paralleled. I would say that the MechJeb, or not the MechJeb, but the inclination or rendezvous information of the IVAs that we've been using also rival it. I think those are just as much good information as the MechJeb one, which is why I have been more excited doing rendezvous in the Kerbal POV series. In the last episode, we did some rendezvous, and we're gonna be doing them in this one. If you missed it, we started season 4 of KXP POV. It is out on our channel now. We have a couple episodes recorded, so episode 2 will be coming out shortly from now. If you're watching this video when it aired, and if you're watching this after the fact, maybe check it out. We might have a few in our season 4 playlist. If you're unfamiliar with KXP POV, we play the whole game in IVA mode, which is first person. Alright, so now we are less than a kilometer away at our closest approach. We're gonna try to bring that down. We're now at 416. And we fired again. We started to raise that, so now we're gonna point ourselves directly at our target and burn. We don't have an SAS hold to point to target because this is Bob Kerman after all, and he's not a pilot. And the probe core that we have is just not advanced enough to be able to set towards target. So now I'm going to take control of our service module and point it towards our target, which is the landing craft, and I'm going to use the service module to close the distance. So as you see, our closest approach is now 57.4 meters. And we'll be only going 4.2 meters relative to our target once we get there. There's no need to make us go even faster. If you want to be impatient when you're coming into a rendezvous, all you need to do is time warp. You know, if you're only going at 4.2 meters per second, it's going to take a long time to get there, but you have time warp. So if patience is the issue, don't just burn faster and faster towards your target to get there sooner and sooner. It's just not going to help. Alright, so now we're kind of swinging around our target. As you see here, we're not pointed out the best way. We did not approach the best way, so let's go ahead and point ourselves retrograde relative to our target and cancel out our velocity so we can kind of stand in an almost stand still to it. Alright, so our relative velocity is 1.5 meters per second going forward. So we're going to go ahead and just flip ourselves around and just keep that 1.5 meters per second. Alright, we're going to go close the rendezvous information because we are close enough that we no longer need to care about any of those numbers because we're basically next to it. Jebediah and Luby are so excited to meet up with Bob because that means they get to go home. Luby, just as a reminder, only wanted to do a flyby. Like, they just wanted to be like, oh look, there's Minmus, bye! But instead, we kept them here in a parking orbit. Jeb and Luby were playing some space poker, having a good old time waiting for Bob. But now it's time for him to come back. I switched over to Jeb because Jeb is a better pilot who actually can lock to target. So that's why I decided to switch over to the service module. But we did have enough RCS and fuel in the lander can that we can choose to use that to rendezvous in the future if we want to. But it's nice to know that we have options. I can't believe how great this mission has come. I didn't have to do any quick saves and quick loads. You know, we successfully landed, we successfully rendezvoused, and we're about to successfully dock. And the craft had exactly what it needed to do to complete the mission. Everything is just going so smoothly. As long as we can bring our Kerbals home and not kill them through the atmosphere, this is going to be a win in my book. And it's a proof of concept. Like, now that we know, I mean, I've been playing this game for a while. I know that I can make it to Minmus, but this is a new series, so let's just pretend for a second that we haven't been to space. But this is a proof of concept that we now know that we can make it to another celestial body. We did skip the Mun in this playthrough because, you know, obviously if you watched a few episodes ago, you would know that we did a quick restart on things and just kind of got ourselves back to it. So we've technically already been to the Mun, but just the idea that we're just kind of speed running to get our way to an interplanetary aspect. And we have researched quite a few. We have Jewel and Lathe, as well as Moho. However, we're gonna have to go to Moho before we go to either Jewel or Lathe, which is unfortunate. I wanted to visit Jewel first, but because we're using the Strategia programs, it requires you to visit Moho before you can unlock the Jewel program. So that's what our plan for our interplanetary is going to be. However, it's going to be a little bit before we can research that and get our Moho program off the ground. So we are going to be doing some more stuff here in Minmus Sphere of Influence, as well as on the Minmus surface. Like I mentioned before, I've got quite a few episodes recorded. We send quite a few more crafts to Minmus. Like, the next 3 episodes is going to be back-to-back missions and getting stuff done, getting things. I don't want to spoil any of it. Just, it's going to be good. I'm so excited with how this has been going out. But anyways, we transferred all the fuel from our landing vehicle, except for the monopropellant. I was going to use the monopropellant to deorbit it, but we don't have any communications with it, so it's just going to stay here in orbit. Maybe we'll visit it again with a service module only, fill it up, let it do its landing, and then come back. Who knows? But now is time for the return. So I go ahead and I play around with the maneuvers, particularly the orbital in and orbital out, because that is able to get us the periapsis that we want above Kerbin, and we have plenty of delta V that we can just make a nice clean circular non-elliptical orbit around Kerbin, which will mean that our re-entry is less likely to be life-threatening. Now let's go ahead and time warp our way out of the sphere of influence. Or excuse me, not out of the sphere of influence, but to the maneuver that will take us out of the sphere of influence. And unfortunately, I have to it's a little bit scary, the maneuver that I'm going to be pulling, because I'm pointing very close to Minmus's surface and burning quite a bit towards it. So I have to make sure that we don't slam into it on our way home. And our burn is done. Our periapsis is acceptable, and we're going to add our maneuver to circularize at the periapsis. And since it's only 915 meters per second, we have plenty to circularize as well as bring us back through the atmosphere. I'm telling you, this mission is just going as according to plan as it possibly could. And there is our goal. Having a little bit of time warp connection issues here, so let's just go ahead and use the maneuver warp to maneuver button. And coming back into the beautiful blue marble. Black Rack's clouds looking great as always. And nothing left to do but let remote tech take over. We're going to go ahead and skip ahead real fast. I'm showing you now the orbit info. The apoapsis and periapsis is really all you need to see. And as you can see here, we're bringing our apoapsis down dramatically. And we have now circularized 90 kilometers above the surface. Not as close as I would have wanted. I like a nice even 70.5, 71 kilometers. But 90 is still good enough. We're not going to be able to land at the KSC like we wanted. Our inclination is just way too extreme, and there's no point in changing our inclination just to come back through the atmosphere. We can recover our Kerbals from anywhere on this planet, so let's just land. And once again, we're going to let remote tech handle the burn. Time warp our way to our maneuver. And fire. Doesn't take much to come back through the atmosphere, especially not at our altitude. So now there's nothing left to do. We're going to go ahead and point ourselves radial out, kick off our lower stage when we're a little bit closer into the atmosphere, and go. I probably could have actually kept myself pointed retrograde, because as you see here, we're now pointed retrograde, and then it just automatically flips the orbital out. We probably could have just pointed retrograde and then kicked off our lower stage before it flipped us. But nonetheless, I like to kick off our stage not in a retrograde aspect, because now it puts it on a different plane than our craft, so I have no fear of it coming back and hitting us. We've got plenty of ablator on our shield, so coming back through the atmosphere isn't too concerning, but of course it's always the last step in the mission, and so until we get through the atmosphere, there's still chance for our Kerbals to die a horrible, horrible death, and for everything to go sideways. It's a very stable craft though, so thankfully we're not flipping around. See, there's Duna. Distant object enhancements is the mod that allows you to see that. So if you're curious about that, I highly recommend it. And we break the sound barrier a couple times. Our craft decides to send some science. I'm not sure why. Not really sure what it's doing. But then before long, our heat disappears and we are safely through the hottest part of the atmosphere. So now it's just a matter of hopefully our parachutes pop. If there's any problem, we have enough time to get our Kerbals out and use their own parachutes. Unfortunately, Luby cannot, but let's try not to have that happen. There we go. Parachutes activated. They are only drogue chutes. However, when we jettison this heat shield, we'll be as light as we possibly can, and that'll give us the best chance of survival. However, we're above the ocean, so we can hit it with a lot more force than we can the ground. So excited when a mission comes together, when we get our Kerbals back home safely. It's just such a great feeling. This game, when you can get it right, it just makes you feel so good. And, you know, I hope you enjoy seeing things like this. I hope you enjoy when we're successful. I try to include our failures as well. You know, want to be honest and transparent with that. But when things just come out right, it's just the best. But anyways, that is where I'm going to leave today's episode. As I mentioned before, we're going to be doing a lot in these coming episodes, but especially with this 2,000 science we just accrued. We're going to be unlocking a whole bunch of stuff and doing a whole bunch of new types of missions as well. But that will be in the coming episodes. And shout out to Bob, a real VIP of this mission. But soon we're going to have to hire some new Kerbal nuts because we will be using all of our employees to their fullest extent. But anyways, that is where I'm going to leave today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're looking forward for more KXP. If you did, please consider subscribing, drop me a like, let me know your thoughts, and I will see you all in the next one. Take care.